We dealt with some technical difficulties. I'd like to welcome everyone to the City of Winona Plan Commission meeting Monday, May 9th, 2022. Could you please call the roll?
Chad Moore.
Here.
Alda Holmquist. Here. Ms. Fallon.
Here.
Ms. Fox.
Here.
Mr. Conrad. Here. Mr. Stein. Here. Mr. Grease. Here. Grice. Sorry.
Grace.
Mr. Holmberg.
Here.
Thank you. Before we move on to the approval of minutes, I would just like to formally welcome our two new members this evening to Plan Commission, Chris and Brandon. Welcome. Look forward to having you on the commission. With that, I'll look for a motion to approve the minutes of April 25th, 2022.
I'll move approval.
I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. I have a second. Any corrections, changes? Yes, Chris.
On page 2, the first full paragraph, Mr. Homburg asked how the existing underground detention basin would factor in. It should be the existing open detention basin. The detention basin we're talking about is on the strip mall property, which is that big deep hole. And along the same vein, on the next paragraph down, the commission members are concerned about that's a different vein. Proposed traffic flow for the existing UPS location should strike during construction. It's once phase 1 private road is operational. Because during construction, there won't be any other entrance to that area. It's just once the construction is done and the road's built over the underground detention, that at that point we've got the two driveways tight and we want to eliminate the exit. And I think it was clear in the minutes when you record, it's just the conditions, it's just not quite right here.
Thanks.
And then last, the adjacent private road, we talked about X only can have cars enter through adjacent. It's not the village lanes lot because it will no longer be village lanes, it'll be the apartments, so it's really the private road.
Any other corrections, changes to the minutes? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Minutes carry. With that, is there anyone on Zoom this evening or here this evening that would like to make an appearance that is not here to speak as part of a public hearing? Okay, I'll close the appearance section and move to 5A, the public hearing on the request by Cindy Realty Company, represented by Schneider and Associates, for consideration of a 2-lot certified survey map CSM to combine parcels 0710-201-9810-4, 0710-201-9820-2, and 0710-201-9880-0, as well as Lot 1 of CSM 2681 at 112-208 Owen Road into 2 lots, case number 2-008-2022. With that, we'll open it up for the public hearing. Welcome.
Hi, Brian Arcand here on behalf of Slindy Realty. We were here for a pre-hearing. I'm going to share my screen. Oh, actually, could I? It says I don't have screen sharing is disabled. If y'all have the CSM, I don't necessarily have to share it, but
You should
like
be able
me
to do
to.
that now.
Okay. There we go. We're here for a pre-hearing. This is, for those not familiar, Owen Road and Winona Drive is just east of here. For those new commission members who might not be familiar, this is the Village Lanes property, which actually is currently part of 3 separate parcels. And this is the existing post office building, which is on its own lot. This CSM would combine the 3 Village Lanes lots into 1 lot. And the post office lot would essentially stay the same as it was. We've added some details since the pre-hearing, including the existing buildings and dimensions, including dimensions to lot lines. And we switched Previously, we'd been calling this Lot 1, which was confusing for some people because the post office is an existing Lot 1 of a separate CSM. So we've switched those lot numbers to stay more consistent. We've also added a shared easement for the underground stormwater management system, which will be fully within Lot 2, but will be shared amongst Lot 1 and 2. So this will be a shared easement on Lot 2 for Lot 1's use as well. There is an existing, there's an existing sanitary sewer that feeds these two buildings. Lot 2 will actually be phase 1 of this project. So this building will be demoed and the new apartment building will be built here first while these buildings are still operational. So there will have to be an easement across Lot 2 to Lot 1 for the existing sanitary sewer lateral that will eventually probably have to be vacated when phase 2 does move forward, because this will probably end up with the new sanitary lateral coming off Owen Road. And then there's some shared private water main as well that'll feed a couple new hydrants and also have a lateral to the new buildings that will also have a shared easement on Lot 2. And there's an existing access easement right now for village lanes. As has been mentioned here before, a lot of people use the same driveway to get to the post office. When these two buildings move forward, and even in kind of the interim condition, there will be a shared drive through here that will have a access easement.
Okay.
Is there any questions?
No, thank you. Will anybody else, again, want to speak on this particular CSM? Then we'll close the public hearing, and we'll move to 5B, consideration of action on the request by Slendy Realty Company, represented by Snyder and Associates, for consideration of the two-lot certified survey map CSM to combine parcels 0710-201-9810-4, 0710-201-9820-2, and 0710-201-9880-0, as well as Lot 1 of CSM 6881 at 112-208 Owen Road, into two lots, case number 2-008-2022. That, Doug.
Thank you. So as mentioned, the request here is to consolidate the 4 existing lots and facilitate the phased development of 2 mixed-use buildings. The general development plan for this was approved by the Monona City Council on May 2nd. Further, CSMs within the city do require Public Works Committee review, and this was reviewed at their May 4th meeting with a unanimous recommendation for approval. The eastern parcel, the current USPS building, is part of an existing CSM. The other 3 parcels are not associated with any sort of CSM. The street that this would be fronting on, it needs to be a dedicated minimum width of 60 feet. Owen Road is 66 feet and meets the dimensional requirements. As mentioned, the easements have been added to the documentation as outlined by the applicant. And then there are no minimum lot sizes within the CDD, Community Design District zoning district, but the proposed Lot 1 would be 1.675 acres, and Lot 2 would be 2.375. Viabeca did review this, as they do with all CSMs, and that review letter dated May 4th is included in the packet and is one of the recommended conditions of approval. With that, staff recommends approval with the conditions that's included in the packet. Thanks.
Thank you. With that, I'm going to start with my our CSM expert, Chris.
Hardly. I do not take that title. Brian, how deep is the infiltration system?
It's only like 4 feet deep or something, 5. We're staying, that storm in Owen Road in the median is not very deep. So we have to stay above that, obviously, so we can outlet. I can pull up the engineering plans and check, but...
Well, what we could do is just, when Darren does his final review, I'd just like him to double check it, because there are standards for that water and the sewer going right under it. We want to just make sure we're okay with cover over those.
Yeah, that sanitary is quite a bit deeper. Yeah, I did take a look at that.
And
we'll double check it.
Okay, and your water, is that going to be the permanent location of it where you're putting it now? You're putting it right on the edge of the infiltration basin?
It's not quite on the edge. We're keeping at least 8 feet away.
That would be great. That would be great, but what it shows, because if you're putting that in new, what it shows, when I get to the water one, that'll shut mine.
See, this dimension is 49.11 feet from its property line.
Right, and it's 50 feet
And
to
the,
underground detention.
Private access easement. That's the access easement.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll double check that as well. I mean, he may have drawn this access easement a little wider.
Okay. Yeah, if you would. just-
Probably not right up to the edge of the system, but yes, the intent is to keep at least 8 feet
Yep.
separation.
Right, if that's a new water, there's no point in putting that under the underground infiltration and detention.
No,
So you keep
and
it-
that's not the intent.
Okay, so just when we have our conditions of Darren's letter, we'll just have him also address any issues that were brought up tonight, which would just be checking where the water, make sure it's outside of that, and that there's adequate separation between the sanitary and the infiltration basin. And the verbiage for the easements, that goes to Bill Cole?
Correct.
So he'll just make sure, he'll look at to make sure that lot one has access for
Yes.
both. All right, thanks. And then in the proposed motion, it talks about Bill having the easement information for review and recording prior to recording the CSM. Brian, don't you record the easement information with the CSM?
In this instance, we would, because, yeah, it's part of the CSM.
Right, so I just reword that the bill has it for review and approval prior to recording the CSM and the easement agreements. Okay, that's it for me, thank you.
Maureen, do you have any questions?
I was just wondering how wide the stormwater management easement was. Not that I have the
It shows
technical
50
knowledge
feet
that he
wide.
does, but just, it wasn't marked on here, and so I
It's,
wasn't sure.
50 feet.
Oh, it's right there,
Yeah.
okay. Sorry, missed it.
Puts it right over the water main.
Yeah. Okay, that's it. That was my other question.
Okay. Randy?
No comment.
Okay. Brian?
No addition.
No?
Fine.
Susan?
No comments, no questions.
Okay.
That's good.
So, with that, do we have a motion?
I'll move approval with the recommendation.
Commissioner Stein.
Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry, Rob. My bad.
Oh, I didn't see
No
him.
worries.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm losing my voice here, so I'll make it brief. I just had one question with the stormwater management easement. Is there a reason? Is there any reason we wouldn't bring that all the way down to the south property line, or is that not typical? It's more of a question that I would like clarification on. I don't know if that's unusual or not.
I would say the system doesn't go all the way to the property line, so normally you'd only do an easement for where it would be necessary over the proposed system for utilities. I guess since the road doesn't go all the way through, there's really no reason to think like maintenance or anything like that would need access from that south property, which also isn't public anyway, so. I guess in this instance, there wouldn't necessarily be any reason to make the easement bigger than it needed to be.
Okay, that's the only question I had. Thank you for the clarification there.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would agree with what Brian said because they're not sharing anything south of where that easement is. That's only private storm sewer. Where they need it is once they enter in for their underground infiltration and retainage, then they're sharing that and they can't function without that. And then from there it goes north. So that would be why he drew it that way, I imagine.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Move approval with recommendation as written by staff. Recommendation 1 is written by staff. Recommendation 2, that at the end of that sentence, put "and the Plan Commission meeting comments tonight." And condition 3, copies of outlined easements for proposed lots should be sent to the city attorney for review and approval prior to the recording of the CSM and easement agreements.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second over here, Susan. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Now we'll move on to new business. Number 6A, public hearing on the request by Salvador's Tomato Pies for approval of a zoning permit for a new outdoor patio and associated fencing at 5507 Monona Drive, case number 2-011-2022. Welcome. Come on up.
Hello, folks. So we went back and redesigned two different options for the Plan Commission to look at. One seems to comply with the 42 inches that were specified at the last meeting, and another is an option A is a modification with 42 inches and then an additional 15 inches of lattice on the top. And that was simply to try and use the material that we already purchased. So that would be the preference. The second option would be the 42-inch version. But in both cases, it's a temporary situation that's intended to be broken down and only used from around April 15th to October 15th, and probably even less than that based on the spring that we had this year. So I think we tried to cover every issue that existed last time, and have been really reasonable with modifying it. And I guess I'd further like to add that in the information that I included, last year, and something to consider is last year we purchased $10,000 worth of patio equipment because of the pandemic and the ability to have an outdoor patio. And we're not alone as restaurateurs in the community and in the community at large that have done that. And that's one of the reasons why the City of Madison and other municipalities have extended their streetery programs because this is a thing now. I mean, it was popular, outdoor dining was popular before the pandemic, but it's even more so now. And in some ways, it's critical to the success of restaurants. So I probably would have not looked at leasing in that location if I were to find out that, having some sort of outdoor dining wasn't possible. So, it's really something that is important to the success of our business to be able to have outdoor dining. So, and that's all I got.
Okay, great, thank you. I'd just like to draw the Commission's attention during this public hearing section to the various emails that were sent today, and some of which you received, I think, earlier, if not all. We have one from Colleen O'Keefe, who's retracting his support for the compromise. One support from Bill Shockley at 6100 Ridgewood Avenue, who's in favor. One from Scott Pauley of 6010 Ridgewood Avenue, is writing in support. And one from Tonya Hamilton Nisbet of 5712 Winnequa Trail, who's also writing in support of the fence proposed. Is there anybody else that's here to speak as part of this public hearing?
I may.
Hang on, Mike. I'm sorry, I was pointing, but I was pointing behind you.
Either way, I'm more than happy to speak. He's more than happy to speak first. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go right up. And Steve, if you could introduce yourself and say where you live, that would be great.
My name is Steve Perkins. I live at 5512 Goucher Lane, which is behind and slightly to the left of Salvatore's restaurant. I'm Michael. I guess we're neighbors. So I was here at the last meeting as well. During the public hearing portion, the plans for the fence were announced, and there was a lot of discussion about the materials and some of the height requirements and things like that. After that portion, it came out that there was potentially a plan to move the fencing around to the side of the building instead of the front of the building.
It was an option, yeah.
Okay, so I don't care about the fencing. That has nothing to do with me. That's up to all of you folks. But what I did want to register is a concern that moving that patio section around to the side of the building could potentially create a noise issue for all of the houses that border your property there. So, the patrons drink, and it is a restaurant that serves alcohol. Open, I'm not sure how late you're open, but it's open into the night. So the only concern that I have, the only reason I'm here is to register that moving that around to the side, as was discussed after the public hearing portion of the last meeting that this was discussed at, would be a concern to me and the neighbors on either side of the municipal. Any questions? That I'm just registering the information on this.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mike?
Hi, I'm Mike Bezrat. I'm the managing member of JMB LLC, that is the property owner of 5511. I have been actually on that premise since 1986. Physically. What I know and what's happening here is exactly what should happen. Patrick is going to put together a nice frontage presentation for what quite frankly should have happened 35 years ago. If you take a look down our entire frontage of our shopping plaza, which it's not, there's many things in this covenant that are great. One thing is a shared parking agreement. It's kind of like the United Nations. It works, and it doesn't. But for the most part, it does work. And the reason why is because we've got different people of different aspects that are working at different times. So we have on one end a health club, at the other end a restaurant, at one end a situation where we have a guy that's doing jujitsu and, that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, this thing has been a balanced lot, and it's worked well for many, many years. So for Patrick to do this, and to Patrick put out a patio situation, it's well within the covenant that's there. The covenant that's there says that we shall maintain a sidewalk. Well, that sidewalk is right out the city street. It's there. I have never witnessed a situation where nobody can get from one situation to the other. It's been very, very rare where one tenant has totally monopolized this entire situation. It just hasn't happened. That's actually why I've actually been one of the recruiters, not only for just my property, but for the Metcalf property or for any of the other properties. I have recruited people that are complementary to this entire shopping center. So I would just merely say to you guys this, in the short term, this is a perfect example of what we need to do. Next year, when this happens, absolutely understand, excuse me, my neighbor's concerns. Absolutely. But that's not this is not what's happening here. Not in one bit, not one least. This is exactly what needs to happen in the short term, probably in the long term, maybe with some modifications, but that's not what we're here to address. In the short term, what we're here to address is what's in front of us. In the long term, let's talk about that next year. And I'm happy to come back to you and talk to you about that. But in the short term, this is perfect. Thank you.
Anybody else? I don't see anybody on Zoom. Oh, sorry.
Mike, before you sit down, can you explain what you mean by short-term and long-term?
Yeah.
I'm curious, I'm not sure if that's clear to us.
All right. So, in the short term, we have a situation where I have 80 feet of frontage. My brother and I own JMB. That's John Guzrick, I'm Mike Guzrick, JMB. That frontage right now is where Patrick is proposing to put his patio. In the long term, which is next year or the following year, after the remodeling is done, all of a sudden, most of that's going to be shifted to the south and around to the south. So then therefore, the impact to any of the other neighbors is pretty much irrelevant. If that makes any sense to you.
I think, to make sure I have it clear, proposal tonight is for the location that it was last year, and it
Exactly.
is in the packet, with the anticipation of maybe in the future a changed location for that. But right now, we're not worried about that piece.
Correct. Exactly.
Okay.
Great, thank you. Great. Anybody else here for the public hearing? Okay, I will close the public hearing. And we move to 6B, consideration of action on the request by Salvador's Tomato Pies for approval zoning permit for new outdoor patio and associated fencing at 5507 Monona Drive, case number 2-011-2022. Rob? Oh, sorry.
I'll just give a quick overview. Some background as well on the deed restriction, as mentioned. So this request had previously come forward specifically for the fence permit. Because of the expansion of use, it was determined this would need a zoning permit. Zoning permit is required because of the expansion of use in the retail business zoning district. The Plan Commission reviews that. Additionally, any fencing is subject to Chapter 175, Section 22. Street yard fencing is typically typically decorative in nature, materials such as wood or stone, and shall not exceed 42 inches in height. And that is typically the same. That's the single and two family standards, but also typically what is enforced in the other districts as well. Just as way of background, the 2016 comp plan shows this parcel in both current and future land use maps as commercial. The proposed layout is to enclose the area in front of the restaurant, facing Monona Drive with a temporary fence. The patio would span the 82-foot frontage and enclose the full depth of the concrete pad. There'd be an 8-foot opening that is proposed to align with the parking layout for access, and it would be attached to planter boxes, allowing for that removal and storage within the winter as well. Two designs are proposed, both with 42 inches in height, one option with the 15-inch lattice above, and that is building upon feedback that the applicant shared from the temporary installation last year, with some concerns about the wind, the views, as well as the vehicles, the lights from the vehicles parking in front of the restaurant. The Commission should discuss the fence designs, the maintenance of the cedar wood, which was discussed at the last meeting, as well as the preferred design option. Some more details were shared by the applicant as well as part of this revised application in terms of the parking capacity, the seating capacity inside of the restaurant, and how that related to the former tenant, as well as the shared parking options. So the patio itself is proposed to have a total of 40 seats, with I think plans for the inside estimated around 60, which would fall significantly below the previous tenant, who had up to 165 seats in that space. In terms of operations, this would be weekdays from 4 p.m. till 9 p.m., and on weekends it would be 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. In terms of the deed restriction, that was shared by Mr. Bezra, the building owner, and I shared that with the city attorney. I also circulated that with the Commission this afternoon. In terms of his read, the documents do not allow for any obstruction to the east of the building without the sign-off of all owners. And his opinion with this is that even though it is a temporary fencing, it is an obstruction and subject to the agreement. His recommendation for that was making the agreement of the owners to the design and to the location a condition of any possible approval this evening.
Who's his? Our attorney?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, the recommendation came from the city attorney. Just in terms of how to possibly handle something like this. I think the other element that I would suggest that differs here from the staff report would be the potential for a size or a layout change if it were to, say, become smaller, if there were to be the incorporation of something like a sidewalk in that pad, for the design just to push back closer to the building, for example, to possibly be an administrative review. Obviously, any enlargement to come back to the commission, but any design that makes it smaller, that may meet the needs of and the design of the other owners in the center, potentially just administrative review. With that, the staff recommendation is approval with the conditions as laid out as recommended in the staff report with those additional elements to it. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I will now go to Rob. Since I slighted you the last time, I thought I'd let you go first this time.
That's okay. Doug, can you just, excuse me, can you, I'm losing my voice. Can you repeat what the city attorney's recommendations were again? I missed
Yes, so the city attorney reviewed the easements as proposed, or the deed restrictions, I'm sorry, and his read was that it does not allow for any obstruction to the east of the building without the sign-off of all owners within the center. And his opinion is that the fence, the outdoor patio, even if it is temporary, movable, and can be broken down in the winter months, it is still an obstruction and subject to the agreement.
Thank you. Well, that's interesting information. But in reviewing the proposal as it sits before us, I think generally speaking, the commission was supportive of having the seating area, outdoor seating area with some sort of screening, which I continue to have, but with the deed restrictions, that might be more of a complication between the tenant and the owner. But reviewing what we have in front of us, I don't have any concerns about the maintenance of the fence, the overall design of the fence. I think Patrick will do a great job maintaining that and keeping it looking up to his standards in the cities. As far as the versions, I tend to lean towards the 42-inch version. I think I appreciate you pointing out the Mana Cafe, where I have dined out many times, and it's a very comparable situation there. They're kind of tucked in an L, which helps with wind, but they're kind of screened by vegetation mostly, unless something's changed since I was last there. But other than that, I don't have any issues with the looks of the fence, the permanence of the fence, and I will reserve comment about future movement of this patio space to the south side until that comes before us.
Thank you, Rob. Chris?
Yeah. As far as the fence, I think our code is really clear on the 42 inches, so I don't think we can go around that. Could I ask you a couple questions? In the version that we have, the 42-inch version, you have the planters in between, so we'd have then a 9-foot section, and then a planter, and then another 9-foot section. Okay, because for me, that's what would make it a decorative fence, otherwise it's just a privacy fence. But then you'll have plantings and planters?
Yes.
Okay, so this is what does it for me to make that a decorative fence, that it's not a solid fence all the way like a privacy fence, and you have it broken up with planters, and whatever you put in there, will make it look great. So I think in that version, I see it as a 42-inch decorative fence. The issue we had before was, a straight board-on-board fence enclosing all looks more like no fence. It looks like a corral or a blockade.
Right.
This way, you can see through in a few areas, and you can put your tables where it's blocked more, and so you get what you want, but you still stay within the ordinance. I think I appreciate the attorney's opinion. I will ask, why would we put Plan Commission in the middle of that? And why would we put our attorney in the middle of that? I think that's an issue between the tenants that are part of this joint access easement. I don't think it's part of what we are here to rule about. We're not that department.
Right.
So I would prefer we leave that amongst the tenants, and
That's right.
if they choose to do it, they need to talk to their neighbors and get their approval. If they think not, then they know that they face a lawsuit.
Right,
And I think we stay clean of that.
right.
We're aware of it. We counseled them, and they can do what they want.
Right.
I have a question. Well, number one, this commission's clear. I know you call it a temporary. What we approved tonight is a permanent thing, a permanent seasonal outdoor dining area, which I have no issue with, because I think it's great when you see diners outside. It makes the restaurant look more vibrant. I think it makes the whole center look more vibrant. So I have no problem with that. And the approval, the way it's written tonight, would be, it's not temporary, it's an approval to do this.
Yeah, and temporary was meant that it's temporary in the sense that we take it down.
Correct, it's seasonal.
Yeah.
But it's not just a season approval. Knowing about your easement issues now, I might just I'm going to say it anyhow, but it probably isn't reasonable. I was wondering if you ever considered just putting a hedge all the way around it. That would be 42 inches tall the whole way.
No, I haven't.
And you could just leave one opening, and maybe next year then take a couple of these panels and turn them. You've got your little entryway, you've got two more intimate dining areas. And I mean, you said you're going to take it out for plowing snow, plow snow the other direction. And you have all kinds of room there. You've got you could give up 12 feet. I know not by the joint access easement, but you could give up 12 feet. So you could have that hedge maybe into that blacktop right there and have a full concrete patio for your seating area. And that would be year round. And for us, it would add some landscaping to the center and maybe spruce it up a little bit. It takes away from all the sparse landscaping, no offense.
No, that's a good idea. My only concern about that is what the licensing review would think about that with the liquor license. Is that enough of a barrier? Is a hedge enough of a barrier?
We say it's okay. Alcohol license review, they might have something to say with it. You maybe have to have a little, one of the wrought iron or aluminum fences on the inside of it or on the outside of it, just to make sure people can't run through the hedges with their beer in their hand and escape. But 42 inches is fine. I did go look up at I can't remember the name of the restaurant, the Old Manna Cafe, and theirs is not quite like this. It's boards, but there's gaps in them, and it's only about 3 foot tall. It's down in that height to make it obvious that people are there dining and make the front look good, which I think, with the planters planted with some landscaping, I think that actually does it for this place. And I think it'll make it even a little more attractive in front of your building.
That's the goal. I want it to be an attractive spot and a comfortable spot for people to eat. And that said, no one other than the Metcalfs on the other end of the building has ever contacted me at all.
Right. And that's, again, that's between you and your co-signers on the easement. I think I'll stop there. I think that would be fine. Just for the gentleman that spoke, what we're looking at tonight, if we approve it, is only for the area in the front. If the applicant would want to go around the side, he has to come back. We have a whole new pre-hearing and formal hearing and a public hearing section. So if they choose to change it, they would have to come back and get approval. It would be a chance for you and your neighbors to come back and talk about it again if you felt it was going to be a detriment to your neighborhood.
Excellent. Good to know. Thank you.
But I think your front area, I'd make permanent if you can.
Because
that's
what people see.
It brings vitality to your restaurant.
I make the same argument in Sun Prairie about activating the street, and we're finally working on it. Right? So it's important for communities, I think, to activate the streetscape. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Corey?
I agree. I think it's great. I think it's great in front. I also prefer the alternate panel construction, the option B, which I know is a headache because you already have the other materials. But I just like the way, I think that's more of a modern look too, which I think is going to match what you're doing more in that spot. It's going to look great with the plantings. It's going to look great. I'll be excited to eat there. My question was about the storage. Do you have a storage location? I noticed that you had the whiskey barrel planters out there now, which I'm assuming because you're going to be planting them.
Well, we used those temporary last year, so those are going away. The whiskey barrels. So
you're not going to store on the side.
No, I'm not going to store on the side. It's going to be stored off-site. Or if there's room inside the building, which there probably won't be. So it'll be stored off-site.
Okay, yeah, that would just be my concern is wherever, when you take them down, that they're down and they're not leaning up against the building. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, like Chris said, not to get in the middle of the dispute, I just wasn't even sure how, so it's a 15-foot sidewalk there. How much room is, how big is a normal sidewalk? Like 3 feet?
5 feet.
5 feet? Oh, 5 feet. Okay. All right. That's pretty big.
May I add that there's no, at the end of the building, there's no reason to go to the end of
Right.
the building except to go to our restaurant. You know, from-
Yeah, there's the alley to walk through.
You can walk down
Yeah.
through the alley or
Yeah.
through the bushes to, yeah.
Right. So, okay. Well, I think it's great. I think having a patio out there is going to be a wonderful addition and bring people to your restaurant.
Thank you. Brendan?
I like the ultimate recommendation about landscaping. There's a lot that's hard surfaces in that whole area, so I think that, you know, dominating it with more greenery than another hard surface, I think would be beneficial. I didn't see included in the information anything about how, these are pretty thin planks. We got 1x6s. Is there any detail of how much structural support there's going to be behind this? You talked,
Yeah.
there's concerns about maintenance, so.
Yes, there's welded joints that are breakaway that we can disassemble, and it's also ballasted with 28, in those planters, there's 28 5-gallon, we're repurposing the oil containers from the restaurant for fryer oil. So each one of those is 5 gallons. There's 28 of them that are going to go in those planters that are going to ballast, and then the boards are then attached to the planters.
Well, I'm thinking more about the bowing of the wood.
The bowing of the wood?
The 1x6s, you know, because that's we got a 96-inch span there, so, you know, if we're talking about maintenance and.
Sure.
Yeah.
That would be a question for our contractor that I could ask, but, I mean, regardless, we're going to maintain it so it
Yeah.
looks.
I think
Good.
I think the cedar will look fine. I was just imagining like how it's, you know, going to look after one season or, you know, even just after a few good rainstorms, you know, if that would get saturated. And yeah, I think that'd be interesting to just have some more information about what the maintenance plan for it is. But I would also prefer more greenery than more hardscape, but I'm very much in support of having the outdoor seating space. I think it's a great addition to that area.
Great. Anything else?
Nope.
Great. Brian?
I support the 42-inch. I'm not going to get in the middle of the deed restriction piece. I think you guys can work that out with your other owners in the property. Other than that, I think it looks great.
Great. Chris?
I'm in support of the plan. I'm looking forward to sitting out there with my family. I have a 4-year-old daughter who touches everything, and I'm just curious. I think I've already removed 2 splinters from her hand in the last 4 years. Are the cedar boards, is the wood sanded enough so that my daughter won't get a splinter in her hand?
Yeah. And I think that, so cedar was the original fence, and I think what didn't quite translate, unfortunately, is that the wood material would not be cedar with the horizontal planks, just because that doesn't really make, I don't know if I can get cedar in that wide and have that make sense. So the idea was that it's going to be a smooth wood, and the idea is that it's going to end up looking like barnwood, like nice barnwood that you would see, because, I mean, we're a farm-to-table restaurant. We always have been, and that's kind of the aesthetic that speaks to us.
Anything else?
Good, thanks.
Okay. Susan?
All right. Well, I agree that we should be in supportive of these outdoor efforts because they are very popular. You see them all over. Every city I've been to recently has them. I like that you're doing it. I also prefer the 42. I think we do. There's no reason not to stick with the ordinance that I can see. I think the 42 inch is appropriate. So I'm fine with option B. I think it looks good, and I guess that's it. And yeah, and we'll as has been said already, to work out the deed restriction issue. But I think this looks nice, and I also don't think it really effectively obscures anything. I mean, I drove through there again today and looked at it, and I thought, the business next door has an awning that very clearly states it. I mean, you can see all the other businesses quite well. They're all very visible, so I don't see it as an impediment at all, really.
The average crossover SUV is way taller than the fence.
Correct. You're right. Yeah. So I think it looks good.
Great.
If I may, I can just address the city attorney's recommendation. That was really, the suggestion of a condition was really effectively his suggestion to help with the, if it needed to be revoked, if it were found that the approval, the agreement was not in place, that therefore the zoning permit for this patio would still be, would be void as well. That was really the sort of origin of that suggestion, and I think it was less so to sort of get in between a private matter. It was more how it impacts the zoning permit specifically.
So something to the effect of if it could be approved by city staff, if it was an adjustment that was smaller in size and footprint, but within the same location.
I think there were two elements. There was that one that was more the sort of design, and I think the other one was more about the restriction itself. If that were found to, say, not have been in place, the patio was located there. I'm not suggesting that would happen, but just that the permit would then be void as well. So kind of a twofold.
Okay, thank you. Patrick, my guess is that since it's not cedar, the question of your contractor would be, is he putting any kind of seal around the wood?
Oh, there is. Yeah, it'll be finished. Yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So to Brendan's point, if there is a sealer on it, whatever kind of wood it is, then the likelihood of it bowing, like he's talking about, would be a lot less. And I would assume that there is some sort of sealer on it. Great. Okay. Well, any other questions?
I just have one quick question. I know we don't want to get involved with the legal aspect of this, but I'm curious if someone can explain to me Colleen O'Keefe's comment that if the city decides to approve this, it leaves her no choice but to seek legal action. Is she talking about suing you guys or the city?
I can't speak to that.
I can.
You'd have to come up to the mic.
Yeah, you'd have to come up to the mic, Mike.
The email was addressed to me, so therefore it is to me.
Okay.
And therefore, I am the one that is going to bear witness to any and all lawsuits
Okay.
as to a result
Right.
of any approval that you guys make. The fact that you guys are making approval of a fence, my humble opinion, that's where this falls under,
Right.
which falls under no definition of a fence, is, to me, just, you have to understand my tongue-in-cheek. I'm happy. The email was to me.
Okay.
I share this to Mr. Plowman. I share this to you guys freely because I am a citizen of Monona, or a refuge of Monona, or a whatever you want to call me, of Monona, and I'm of the opinion that I'm a neighbor, and I'm going to do the best for my neighbor, even though she has put forth an aggressive email. And that I can only assure you that I will do this, knowing full well that I have known her for 28 years and watched her walk down the middle of that parking lot for 28 of those years. Not down the sidewalk, but down the middle of the parking lot. So there's a lot of things here that someone's trying to do, and I'm not going to go there because there's no reason to.
Right.
Because quite frankly, a year from now, we're going to be coming in front of you for a little bit different reason. There's going to be a gentleman here that's going to go, oh, what's going to happen here? And we're going to explain to him that, we do want to see this kind of wrap around the south side of the building.
Right.
And the reason why we want to see this wrap around the south side of the building is because that's where the sun is. But that's not what's going on here.
Right. Got it. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
It would be among property owners. It would not be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Hearing none, do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion. Before I do that, I'm just going to let you know where my head's at. I'm not an attorney. I rarely pretend to be one. But I just think that we don't need to be in the middle of this. With all due deference to Cole, I think if there's a lawsuit, to answer your question, whenever there's a lawsuit, you know as well as I do, they name anyone they possibly can. That'll happen. But our motion, if we approve this tonight, we're approving the use of a fence around there for a patio. We're not telling him that we can void his easement. We're not telling him anything like that. We don't want to pretend to tell anything like that. And I'd even hesitate to say this is predicated on whatever they need to do. I think that's between them. I see a lot of nodding heads, so I think we all agree. And in response to that bowing of the lumber, we do have condition 3 that it has to be well maintained. If there's concerns with the building appearance, they have to come back to planning commission. So for me, I would interpret that to mean that if that thing's bowing looking like crap, I don't expect that to ever happen at this place, but if it does, we have the right to bring it back in. And if we need to, we could revoke the permit. So, having said that, I'd move approval with conditions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 as written by staff. Condition 6, that we are approving the 42-inch version as submitted with planters spaced at 9 feet. And condition 7, that the planters shall be planted with the final landscaping approved by staff.
Do I have a second?
A second.
I have a second. Any other discussion? Yeah, Corinne.
Just a question. If Patrick goes back and decides to put additional planter in between instead of a 9-foot span, do more hedges or whatever, is that something that could be approved then by Doug? Or would that be something that we'd have to reapprove?
I think it would depend on what the extent of the change was.
Yeah.
Quite honestly.
Yeah.
And if he's going to do the hedges, which I would do, he's going to need to work with his neighbors, but I wouldn't even put him on the concrete. I'd take that asphalt out for 2-3 feet between the concrete and the parking lot and put him there and have the concrete for the tables. And that would be different than what we've approved tonight. So in my opinion, it would have to come back. But other than that, this is approval for that space. I mean, he can run it like that for 10 years unless one of the conditions is violated.
Right, but one of the conditions was the 42 with the 9-foot span, so it was fairly specific.
Yeah, that's what he submitted.
Right.
And if he put in more planters, I think we'd all be thrilled. But if he tried to put in less, we would probably be less happy.
Yeah. Brian.
I know it's minor. I think it's 8-foot span.
It says, oh, you're right.
Yeah. I just have.
I accept that as
measurement,
I accept that as a friendly amendment. My dyslexia, I just looked at the 9 right away in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to buy 10-foot lumber
Yes.
and cut a foot off. That wouldn't make a lot of sense.
No.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any other questions, comments? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Now we're moving to item number 6C, public hearing on the request by Glacier Restaurant, Ida, represented by Grant Signs for new signage at 901 Femright Drive, case number S-004-2022.
Hello, I am Jonathan Kuhn from Grant Signs. Second planning commission appearance. First one was for Mala Yoga during the pandemic. We're here to talk about a ground sign for Pastor Pedro. This would be an aluminum construction sign with routed faces, backed with acrylic, and then there would be vinyl, perforated vinyl applied to that acrylic to give the appearance of black during the day and then once the lights turn on, it would illuminate in a clear white. The only vinyl that would be on the sign is the tagline, which is underneath the title of the sign. Thank you.
I assume there's nobody else here to speak during the public hearing portion of this? Seeing no one else, so I'll close the public hearing. And we'll move to 6D, consideration of action on the request by Glacio Restaurant Vida, represented by Grant Signs for new signage at 901 Femright Drive, case number S-004-2022. Go ahead, Doug.
Thank you. So the request here is based upon the new church use that has occupied and purchased the space. The transition happened in the summer of 2021. The new signage would be at 901 Femright Drive, which is located in the Community Design District, CDD. According to the sign code, one monument sign is allowed per site, up to 5 feet in height and 60 square feet in size. The proposed sign is 5 feet tall, 2'4" base with a 3'6" sign cabinet, and is just under 35 square feet in area. Therefore, it appears to meet the code requirements. Setback 19 feet from the curb, and it needs to be a minimum of 15 feet. And they also typically have landscaping around the base. A plan was submitted as part of this application, and just recommended that city staff work with the applicant to finalize that installation. There is also an existing monument sign on the property from the previous use. There can only be one monument sign on the site, and it would just be worth clarifying that that also be removed. With that, the recommendation of staff is approval of the sign with the 3 conditions of approval as listed in the staff report. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan, would you like to start off on this one?
Sure, I think it looks great. I don't have any concerns. I guess my only thought is whether we need a condition of approval for landscaping, since it's not mentioned here, or, I mean, there is a rough sketch of it, but just adding a 4th condition, since we do expect landscape signs to be landscaped. But no concerns otherwise. These look pretty standard. The sign looks nice, so.
Great. Thank you. Chris?
I have no concerns. Looks good to me.
Okay. Brian?
No concerns.
No?
No concerns.
Just clarification about the landscape drawing, about how big that is. But yeah, I would say that would be something you could work with the city
Maybe
staff on.
With staff approval or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And putting more plants in there too, but Doug can work with you on that.
Great.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I had this right. This is not an internally illuminated sign.
It would be internally illuminated, yes.
And by what magic are you going to turn white to black and black to white?
So there's if you can kind of see on this right here.
I see what we have, but here's my concern. I'll get to the point.
Okay.
When we have signs that are internally illuminated with all white in the background, they glare. It's just like headlights in your face, especially nowadays with LEDs. So we'll always have conditions to cut it down more opaque. If this isn't going to do that, and your magic works, and it'll be only white letters at night and only black background, I'm fine with it. No problem. My concern was if we get that big white glare. But
To, I hope, make you feel a little better, the white will be straight aluminum. So the only part that's actually routed are
Okay.
those letters.
that helps me a
So
lot.
that
So only place the internal illumination can go through is those letters, and then because of the way it's perforated and has the different things, it will look
correct.
light at night.
Very correct.
And then you just see the black. Okay, that makes more sense. I was a little confused with that. Other question is, the document we have tonight doesn't tell how far it is off the driveway. Where it's proposed, I think it's just fine. But if it would sneak in towards that driveway, then it makes it harder to see kids on a skateboard or somebody coming down that sidewalk.
Right.
So I'd like to just make sure, where you have a bunch of lines with the sidewalk that comes by the front of your building. And that's where the temporary one is right now, and that's just fine. If you drove by, you can see. But if we get closer to the driveway, so again, I think Doug, the final approval on location. All I'm really looking for is make sure it doesn't sneak in by the driveway and obstruct something. Other than that, I would look to Rob to see what he thinks about the landscape plan.
Okay.
I thought it said that the setback was 19 feet.
Yeah, what I was talking about, Rob, was how far it's set back from the driveway, the edge of the
Oh,
driveway.
okay. Yeah, my only comment on the landscape, I think that can be handled internally with staff, but I would like to see more landscape and ideally a more native plant material palette is preferred.
Okay.
Native grasses and perennials, shrubs, chokeberries, winterberries,
So
etc.
you're okay with staff approval on that?
What's that?
You're okay with staff approval, final staff approval on that?
I think so, as long as it's more robust to a landscape plan. I don't think they need to come back for that, and I'm happy to work with Doug offline to review it briefly.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Do I have a motion?
I don't know if the language of it.
Okay.
Well, let's, Chris, do it.
Move
He's the
approval
expert.
of conditions 1 through 3 is written by staff, and condition 4 that the final landscaping plan be brought back to staff for final approval.
Okay.
And nothing about location, then we're going to assume that's,
Yeah, you're right. And 5,
That's
that
at a
staff
fifth,
approved the
yeah.
final location.
right.
'Cause you know what we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay. I have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second?
Second.
I have a second on the floor. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That takes us to item number 6E, public hearing on possible recommendation of the City Council for an ordinance amendment to Chapter 480 of the Monona Municipal Code of Ordinances regarding shoreline accessory structures, case number 2-012-2022.
Thank you. So I'll just run through the sort of the highlights here, and I'm happy to answer any further questions. The memo outlined here, the request and the proposed revisions to the city's boathouse ordinance. This would be for both the single-family and two-family sections of the ordinance. Having reviewed adjacent municipalities and also some of the inbound requests that have been coming through the city, there are 3 items that are proposed for consideration. The first is the definition of a boathouse and the elements that are included with that. The second is a clarification of habitation within the boathouse, within that structure. And the third is discussion of potential dimensional changes. So these have been reviewed and modeled on adjacent communities, as well as the trends that we've begun to see. This has been referenced versus Monona data using the GIS information that we have, and you'll see that included in the memo as well. I would say both the definition and the habitation are both seen as clarifications. And then the third suggestion here for the dimensional changes are in line with others, and you'll see how they compare with other, both municipalities as well as the county, that would be what appears to be more appropriate for their intended use. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great. I should I could certainly let the commission know too that, well, first of all, I want to thank Doug. I want to thank you for the work, and Lisa, I want to thank you for your work on this. I know that you did a lot of research into what other communities have done, and it's not a small task to peel this onion, so thank you for your work. And I can say as ZBA chair, as Doug pointed out, the issue of boathouses and the size of boathouses and the height of boathouses comes up a lot. And I think it's safe to say that one of the challenges for this, from the current ordinance standpoint, and part of the reason why this is coming forward, is that it's sufficiently vague, the way it's currently written, that it's kind of been up to the interpretation of whoever the inspector is. or whoever might be sitting on the ZBA at the time. And so, more about the inspector. And so we're trying to do what we can to write it in a way that it makes more sense. So with that, I'll open it up for discussion. Sorry.
Probably switch.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot that because I'm so used to you talking during the consideration of action. We'll close the public hearing and move to consideration of action on the possible recommendation to City Council for an ordinance amendment to Chapter 480 of the Monona Municipal Code of Ordinances regarding shoreline accessory structures, case number 2-012-2022. So do you want to, is there anything else that you want to add?
Nothing at this time. I'll make myself available for questions, certainly, and would just welcome the dialogue.
Okay.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Who would like to start? Chris?
I would love to, and I'll apologize ahead of time for how long this takes. Well, first, full disclosure, most of you know I live on the lake. I have a boathouse.
Yeah.
It's really well built, and it will last longer than I do, so I don't think this will have any effect on me, because mine was permitted, inspected, and put in, so I'm clear. So when I talk about this, I'm not talking about my own. I just have a lot of experience with boathouses. When I first saw this, I was really excited. I mean, man, you're just slashing the rights of lakefront property owners to have an accessory structure. But I actually, the chair was very gracious in explaining some of the problems here, because you don't see the problems. It's not on our staff report. And once speaking with her, I understand some of the problems. Basically, our ordinance says, you know, a boathouse. Okay, what's a boathouse? I understand that point. So I'd like to respond to a lot of these things. I think the intent of what we're trying to do is great. I think the way this is written is way too restrictive, and I have some suggestions that aren't in here that I think would be beneficial for the city to have and beneficial for the property owners. So I'll start with the size. The appropriate size is what's in the code right now, 1,000 square feet. Number one, every property owner in Monona has the right to 1,000 square foot of accessory dwelling. Accessory buildings, I shouldn't say dwelling, that was the wrong thing to say. Strike that from the record. Accessory buildings. And why do we come to a lake owner and say, oh, but you can only have 450 because we just want to rein you in? I don't think that's, number one, I don't think it's fair. Number two, you could barely get one modest-sized boat in there. Now, I know you're inventoried a lot of boathouses. There's a lot of old boathouses around Monona that were built 50, 60, 80 years ago. And what you can fit in there today we would call a rowboat with maybe a 15-horse outboard engine. That's all you can fit in them. My boathouse is 900 square feet. When we built it, we measured up what we need to be. I have a boat that's 19 and a half, 20 feet long, which would be, if anything on today's lakes, maybe a little below average size. My boat barely fits in there because you have to remember these aren't cars. Number one, they're wider. So you need a wider door, and you have a cradle that goes outside the boat, so you need to get that through the door. Number two, when you go in, the cradle also extends past the front of the boat. So once I get my 20-foot boat in my 30 by 30 boathouse, I've got about 2 feet to walk around in the front and maybe 6 inches before it hits the door, because the lower unit, or if you have an outboard, it has to be trimmed up to not hit when you come in. So it's not like putting a car in and say, well, you can have a 2-car garage with 450 square feet. You can't possibly have a 2-car boathouse with that. I would maintain that the size of mine, we made it a hair smaller, and I'll get to that, but the size of mine, I would say, is pretty conservative to get 2 boats in there and still be able to walk by them. When I talk about the size of mine, I think the one thing that our ordinance has always done, let's face it, we are a lake community, a lakefront community. We pride ourselves in that. We have a lot of ordinance written around that, and it's one of the great features of Monona. And our ordinances, as we've always had them, are to help preserve those views. Now, that's why I can't have any accessory building between my home and the lake, is because that would obstruct my neighbor's view. And the only thing I can have is a boathouse. Now mine, I said, is the 900 square feet, 30 by 30, basically. And for me, my parents originally owned it. We built it for them, but they were there, and I bought the home afterwards. They had 2 boats in there. It was claustrophobic. It was so full. I couldn't stand it. And we sit out on top much more than we ever take a boat out. So we got rid of the 1 boat, and we have 2 kayaks on the other side. It's awesome. So we've got a couple kayaks. My wife's 69 years old. Oh, shit, I said. Anyhow, she's older than I am even. And so for her, we have it on the dolly. She can get the 2 kayaks out. It works great for me. And what it does is it allows a little room up front. What do I do with that? I have my little garden area where we can take our pots and our wheelbarrows and things. I have a little bitty workshop area where I can work on the boats or something I've got in the backyard. So to say it can be exclusively for boats, I would disagree. It is my garden house, because I'm not allowed a garden house. I'm not allowed a place to put my lawnmower. I'm not allowed any of that being on the lake. You could argue that, well, I could put it in the side yard, but look at all our lake lots. They are narrow. It's expensive property, and people usually don't have an extra 15, 20 feet on the side of the home. So basically, for a lakefront property, you've got nothing. You've got your garage, or you've got, in my case, the boathouse, where I do have those in there. And I will say, I actually have a heater in there, and we keep it above freezing, so Janet's plants don't freeze. She has some bulbs that can't get cold. She likes to go in there, work on pots in the winter, and that way I don't drain my lower units on my boat. And if you look at the boat, it's really good for it. It's 30 years old. The upholstery hasn't cracked from being out freezing and things, so I think that's, if I were on any other lot in Monona and I had a garage back there, there's a lot of my that have heaters in them. They go back there and they work in their garage in the wintertime. There's a lot of them that have plumbing in there. I have a sink in mine where I can wash my hands and it doesn't run on my feet. It actually flows away. And that's, I think, a reasonable expectation for a homeowner to have an auxiliary use in there of the boats. I've spoken with Nancy about this, and I understand that we have some issues. These aren't meant to be your party room. They're meant to be a boathouse. And I think we can address that in a lot of ways where we actually define the boathouse. And number one is primarily for boats, primarily used for boats, other watercraft, and their accessories. That doesn't exclude me from having a workbench in the corner or a garden bench for my wife. I mean, that still should be allowable. And to be able to have normal utilities in there like you would in any garage that you'd put in your backyard, which is allowed by ordinance. You can have a garage in your backyard as your accessory building. In fact, if you don't make the garage too big, you can have a garden house and a garage. So that's where I'm going with the uses. I think we need to very seriously define what is the use. And I agree wholeheartedly with the chair that it has to be written down that this is primarily for boats, other water accessories, and craft. I think that's important. I think it's important that they don't go around the ordinance and just pretend it's for that there has to be doors facing the lake that are where you're able to bring these things in and out. And certainly if you're going to propose a 30 by 30 boathouse, there better be door big enough to get a boat in and out. I think the elevations of them is critical. And that's not really addressed right now. I think we need to. I've learned a lot about boathouses over the 21 years we've had one. And before we built it, I did a lot of research to find out what elevation should it be at, right? Because I talked to every neighbor up and down that had them, and they all had, oh, it was up on my boathouse about this high in that one flood, and this high on that other flood. And we took all that into account, and then we tweaked it up a little bit from there. We ended up being about 3-4 inches above ordinary high water mark. I can tell you now, 21 years later, that was a mistake. As we all know, the lakes have gotten a lot higher elevations since then. And my boathouse has flooded a number of times to the point where I put floodplain on it. So when it starts getting high, I can stop it. Because it is a mess in a boathouse when those lake waves come in and out, you know, with dead fish, dead weeds, everything. So I think just to protect people, just like we do with our other building codes, our other ordinances, we should require it to be no lower than a foot above ordinary high water mark. And I think by doing that, you solve your issue with you're worried about they're going to build right on ordinary high water mark. More power to them if they can do that. I don't think we have to worry about that because I have a lot of faith in Brad Brown, okay? He does a really great job inspecting, making people toe the line, erosion control. But from the ordinary high water mark down, that's not our jurisdiction. That's the DNR. And with all due respect to Brad, when a DNR warden shows up with a gun on his hip and the police powers that's a lot more effective to keep somebody from being in the lake bottom, and that will do a lot more. And it's not our jurisdiction. I understand the intent was to say, well, let's not let them spill into the lake bottom. If they do, that's a DNR issue, and that it will be seriously handled. Anytime you go down there, you need a permit. So I think also by saying that it has to be a foot above ordinary high water, it naturally pulls you back a little bit. To say you have to be 4 foot back, if it's a really steep lot and you say you have to be 4 foot back, we're creating an alcove in there with just weeds and everything's going to sit. You don't want to do that. Plus, we speak on the other side of our mouth when we keep talking about you have to have a maximum pervious or maximum impervious and a minimum pervious. So we're saying you have to keep that, but now we're going to have you bring it back 4 feet in your lawn just because we think we want to be safe. So I think those conflict. I would suggest we get rid of that and make sure they put them at least a foot above. Now for elevation, we built ours. We were very careful about all our neighbors. We went out there and we staked the footprint in a lot of different places. We tied flagging ribbon along the top. We went over to our neighbor to be the most effective, Evie Johnson, and we sat in her porch with her because she sat out there every night to see where we could go to not affect her view. And we ended up with a pretty short boathouse, and I actually regret that. But my clear height is a little under 8 foot. And if anybody wants to see, I have scars on my head that shows how many times I hit stuff in there. Because you try to climb in and out of a boat, and the boat's, remember, up on the dolly already, and then you're up in there just to try to work on it, to service it. It's not enough height. That puts my top of my boathouse a little under 9 foot. Now, Evie's house was sited too low. When the lake flooded, it would actually get into her basement. So once she passed, her property was bought and the people came in, tore it down, they built a new house and they built it up where it needed to be. So the reason I say I regret it is I wouldn't have regretted it if she was still there, but she's long gone and now I have a boathouse that's a little bit too low, but we did it for Evie. I don't regret that we did it for Evie, but I learned a lot through that. So when we get to that, I'm long-winded on this, I think we need to protect lake views, and every lot is so different. Where I'm at, we're very level to the lake, and that's why the height of that boathouse is so important. If you went with our current code and somebody went in and built a 14-foot high boathouse next to me, I would scream that that's inappropriate where I'm at, and it shouldn't be that way, and we should look at that. My opinion is we take our initial ordinance, what a boathouse is without any more special approval, down to 10 feet. Nobody builds a boathouse without leaving a level top on that they can sit out on the deck, right? And if you look at, I'm a little too short, that would give them an extra foot. And I think it might pinch some people, but you also have to balance the neighbors and what it's going to do to their visibility. So if you do it to 10 feet and we don't let them get around our ordinance, I know right now they're building these things up and up and up because the slope's going with them, so it never is more than 14 feet above at any point. 10 feet is from the bottom of the boathouse, the slab, to the top of the boathouse. I don't care how much of it you bury. Well, I do. Once you get into some of the steeper lots, then I think Plan Commission should have the ability, and I say Plan Commission so we don't put all this onus on ZBA all the time. They have to show a distinct hardship. If our intent is, yeah, 14 foot's okay, we don't block any views of your neighbors, a lot of these steep lots, you could easily put a 14-foot boathouse on. It wouldn't affect you if you're 10 or 14. And there's boats like ski boats that have that bar in the back. They can't get into a door like mine. My door's too short for that. So I think we should have the ability to raise that when it doesn't impede any of the neighboring views. And what I've seen from Plan Commission is people are pretty serious about going out and looking at sites before we talk about it. And the Plan Commission can go out there and see it and say, hey, no, if I see this, your neighbor, you're going to block his view, we won't do it. And you don't have to have that. Your right is to have a boathouse, and that's what we're talking about, right? So if we do that, I think it would be satisfactory. We're protecting the people that aren't even protected right now from a 14-foot tall structure. The reason our accessory building codes like that is because most people, when they build a garage or a building in the back, is an 8-foot wall, and then depending on what it is with the 412 slope, it could be anywhere from 4 to 5 feet, which would put it at, 13 feet? And I think when the code is written, well, let's just give them 14 feet to be safe, so won't be exception. Again, you're not going to build a boathouse. You don't need to build a boathouse and put a sloped roof on it. So that's why that 14-foot isn't needed. It would be nice for some people when they want to put a little taller door in, but it's not needed. The 1,000 square foot, again, mine's 900 square foot, but I can't put a float, you know what a float boat is, right? What's going out there? There's some really small ones that are 20 feet long, but most are 24 to 26 to 28. I can't fit any of those in my boathouse. So when we allow it up to 1,000 square feet, they could have 2 doors, and they could have a little longer. They could take and stretch it out to 31 or 32, and then they could at least get a short float boat in there. I don't think that's excessive. So that's where I keep going back to that 1,000 square feet. Number one, I go back to equity. But what does it really take to have basically a 2-stall boathouse? And a lot of people will probably be like me, and they'll keep kayaks and canoes. But again, I would rather see those out of the way instead of laying on somebody's yard. And the other great part about it is a lot of people with them, then they take their pier sections. My pier sections, I store all inside. I don't have room for the steel, but I can get all the pier sections inside in the wintertime. I can fill it up. So again, I don't think that's excessive. One thing that's in here I don't agree with is it says you can have 3-foot maximum steps. Again, I just described my boathouse. I'm about 5.5 feet out of the ground. And if you were to tell me I can't have steps leading up to the top and sit out there, I would be pretty upset. And I think that's a reasonable expectation of people. I'm not aware of a boathouse. There probably is around the north. I'm not aware of one that doesn't have a railing around the top and people sit out there with a chair and a table. And that shouldn't be taken away. And I know they're all used like that right now. I don't think we should be talking about lifts and piers in this ordinance. That's highly regulated by the DNR. And back when they changed the ordinance, I had to send in a drawing establishing where I'm grandfathered in for what I have for piers and hoists. And then if you don't do that, then you're just subject to theirs, which I believe is 2 hoists you can have. And a certain section of pier but can only go so far just to get up to a certain depth of water. So that's pretty highly regulated by them. And again, it's really outside of our jurisdiction because it's inside theirs. So unless there's something we've heard, I don't see why we would try to wade into that with a boathouse regulation. I have notes. I'm sorry, I just went off and started talking. I don't know.
I know what you forgot.
Well, I made a lot of notes, but I just spoke without reading them. Yeah, I think it's one thing that's been happening a lot, and I'm not sure how it started or where it started, but a lot of these boathouses are now being built with a separate structure right above them, so it's like a 2-story structure. I don't know how they got that in. I don't know how they talked the building inspector into it. I know years ago when Monona had its own building inspector, he was long-term, he knew exactly what we did and didn't do, and it's hard, we have good people doing it, but it changes, they deal with different communities, and it's hard to keep up on it. My take would be, it depends on what the commission's pleasure is. I'm not offended if they have a really steep slope and that thing's below any vision lines and they happen to have a porch on top. It doesn't offend me, but it's not what was intended with boathouses. So I think we have to decide, is that the intention? And if we do allow it, if the discretion, or if you wanted to allow it, I guess I would ask them, what's that do to the square footage? Because to me, if you've got a 1,000 square foot boathouse and you put a 1,000 square foot porch on top, you've got 2,000 square feet, the way I see it. So we would have, if we even thought it was feasible to allow, we'd have to ask why. I understand why people want it. When you have, some of these have 80 steps down the lake. It's nice to have somewhere where you can have a refrigerator or have something so that you don't walk all the way back up and all to your home. I understand that, but I also understand you're putting a structure that wasn't intended down on the lake. So I think that's an area that we need a lot of discussion about. Is that appropriate? It is appropriate. I have other ideas of how we make sure that it's very, very strictly enforced. But first question would be, is it even appropriate to do that? I love the addition of saying that this is not intended for human habitation. I think we try to start limiting, you can have this, you can't have that. It's very clear, it's not human habitation. It's very clear when you go in my boathouse what it is. And if somebody's got a sofa and a kitchen and all this stuff, it's very clear what that's being built for. I think we have to make it clear that it's not human habitation. I think we have to be careful and start saying, well, this can be in, but that can't be allowed. I think we could get down a slippery slope there. I do have a question on side yards. They've always been 3 foot in Monona. When did we change them to 7 foot? For accessory structures, I'm talking about. And I know because when I built my garden house 40 years ago on my other property, that was 3 foot. And when my neighbor built his boathouse next to me about 20 years ago, it was still 3 foot. So did we have an ordinance change for accessory structures?
Not for accessory structures, they would typically be 3 feet, but the piers section, that is regulated as part of the building section, and it has a setback dimension in there, which is 7 feet.
For what's that?
For the piers.
Yeah, I don't think, I mean, the piers, but for these structures, we should at least talk about why would we not let them have that 3 foot? Mine, I went to the 7 foot, but I wanted to be able to put steel right next to it. We take it out in the wintertime, the tracks sit right next to it, and that's a perfect spot for it. But if somebody wanted to be 3 foot, if you had a really narrow lot, some of these lots are 40 foot wide. And they want to put the boathouse off to one side or another just so it's not in the panorama. My neighbor has his boathouse 3 foot off my property line, and whether it was 3 or 7, it wouldn't really affect me. So I think we should have a discussion why we want to do that. We have a lot of speak in here about the county's ordinances, and a big generalization to that is the county has a lot of ordinances, and they're all set up for rural waterways. We are the most highly urbanized lake in Dane County, and that's why there's different standards. With the county, they have all these picturesque areas, low development. They want to keep it looking pristine and nice, and if you want to put someone to do that, we're on Lake Monona, and there is, other than maybe San Damiano, there's not a lot of undeveloped land. So I don't think it's reasonable at all to go and look at a county ordinance and say that all that pertains to Lake Monona. And I've had some issues with the shoreline single-family lots. 565 is an extraordinary number, so that's got to include waterways and lagoons and everything else. Those aren't areas where people are going to put in a boathouse. So I think the comparison I don't think it's appropriate, and I think I've given a very strong argument just why we should leave it at the 1,000, but regulate it and make sure we know what it is. I gotta admit, I saw this, and you can tell I was a little cranked up, but then once I read it and reread it, all it says is you can have a boathouse. It doesn't say what it is or how it should be built or anything like that, and I get where we're having problems right now. And I think we need to have a very open discussion about whether or not it's even appropriate to put a porch above it. Once you put a roof on it, I think it's square footage again. I don't know how the building ordinances go, but to me that would double the square footage once you do that, number one. But it was never intended for that. I understand if I had a steep shoreline, I'd want to have one up there somewhere to sit, but I like sitting out in the open, and I think I told the chair we planted a tree, so we need a little shade, we have it. And I'll be quiet for a minute. I'm still going to review my notes to make sure I didn't miss too many things, but.
Okay. Thank you. Corey?
Well, some of this is, I don't have a boathouse, so I don't know, like, I read the boat landing, and it's a boathouse without any roof or walls. Is that just concrete pad? What is that?
I have no idea what that means.
So a lot of this, the naming convention and such, those elements were taken straight from the ordinance, so just lifted. So instead of necessarily creating just a boathouse section, the suggestion was it would be everything that could be in the shore yard, which is, as Chris mentioned, you can't have storage sheds, you can't have those things, but anything shoreside of single family, that was what was listed. So I was just sort of lifting it straight from that. And the definition that this did go through City Attorney Cole, and that was his addition, was for the boat landing, just to clarify that element as well.
So is it like a pad or
It's
what?
not necessarily a pad, because I'll tell you, I had when I first moved into my house, I had somebody had put a lift in the same way that you would not a lift as in this.
Okay.
Or it was a shore tracker.
Okay.
That could pull off a 5,000-pound boat into my, what I call my front yard. In the channel, and it was anchored in the channel, and the whole thing was gravel underneath it, so it wasn't concrete. It wasn't. It was gravel, but it was. And then had a huge. Not huge, but I mean, it had a little engine on it. You could just flip the switch. You could pull your boat up into the yard.
Okay.
and, you know, I'm a kayaker, so I sold it. Got rid of it and did something else in my yard. But I would imagine, again, there weren't any walls, there wasn't
Yeah.
anything, it was just,
That makes sense.
right.
I was not envisioning that, but I get that now. I like the definition. I agree with Chris. It was you can do a lot of words to really just say, this is not for people to be living in or recreating in. This is a place to put your boat.
Right.
So, I think the fewer words, the better. So the not intended for human habitation. And I could see why having like a, what do you call them, like a laundry tub, kind of a sink, like a utility sink in there makes sense to have that too, especially if, you've got a boat and you need to wash something off or whatever. So not being so restrictive, I do agree with that point as well. And I didn't have as many comments, but my other comment was about the height. I thought 14 seemed high as well, and I don't have a lot of, if it was nicer, I could have gotten in my kayak and gone along and looked around a little bit, but the Dane County ordinance is 12, and some of the others are 12, and so I guess I wasn't sure why we went with 14. So I guess that was my other comment. But other than that, I think Chris makes some good points about the 1,000 square foot as well.
Brandon?
I agree with Chris's comments about height, about making it appropriate to the use case, because I think that's the most visually obstructive. And I also agree with the other point about even with whatever use you're making of the elevated portion of it, that needs to be pretty well defined and highly regulated. I also, took note of the human habitation, but can't we add something to this as well that just is talking about it being classified as an normally unoccupied as well? There's probably I think it's like an S classification or, for the space as well. Although primarily that might then affect what the requirements are from a fire suppression perspective more than anything else. But I think human habitation is a good starting point, but maybe there's other conventional terms in terms of regulating how it's classified to be occupied. But yeah, those would be my chief points.
I too don't have a boathouse. So because lake lots are restricted to only have, they're only an accessory building could be a boathouse.
Mm-hmm.
I do agree in the sense of why they would be more restricted in size than any other location. Which leads me actually to another question of why would it need to be a boathouse with doors to the water? Why would I need to restrict them? So if it was someone that didn't want to lift a boat in there, but they want an accessory building, we don't want it in the lake yard away from the water to obstruct views, but why, if I live next to Chris, why does he get to have one if he has doors on it and I don't, because I don't put doors on it? So just something for us to ponder of do we really want to limit the accessory building structure on lake property to only a boathouse that has doors to the lakeside? I think Chris makes a good point of if you have no other outdoor storage in your yard, that does seem to be the appropriate place to put any other materials that you would put for storage in your shed normally, which leads to the other aspects regarding heat and some other aspects that I don't think would be unrealistic to have in your outdoor shed in a backyard. So why should we restrict it for a boathouse structure? I agree with the comment regarding the elevation to the ordinary high water mark versus the distance up shoreline from that. I think that only makes sense given the variation of shoreline around Monona I could imagine some properties I've been to where it would not work to do it the 4 feet way. Height of the structure, I agree. 14, I do agree that likely is much more the adoption of a typical shed garage type structure with a pitched roof. I would say the majority of boathouses don't use a pitched roof system, but I'm not sure I'm not committed to any height, but I do like the idea of somehow having it related to the neighboring properties. So maybe setting a minimum with a potential for a higher, as long as it fits with the relative neighbors and sightline views. I have a clarifying question, and this was for something that Chris said, and it had to do with the 3 steps outdoor space. And I want to make sure I understood your comment first before I add the question I have. So when you made mention that if the amount of steps outside were more than 3 feet, it wouldn't be allowed.
There's some section here, I don't even understand what it means, but for mine, I think I have 8 steps to the top. It's like 5.5 feet to get there. And why would we tell somebody you can't have those? It's very, come over anytime you want to look. And it's very non-noticeable.
Because what I think I read here is 3 steps. I think it's borrowing from the idea of a garage or shed, where you would have 3 steps up from the base to be able to enter that garage or shed.
I think it was 3 foot, but
It says not over 3 feet above the ground level.
yeah, on page 5, 8B, uncovered steps not over 3 feet from ground level.
But it's following, is your 8 steps, does that follow like the terrain, so at any?
No, the boathouse is 5.5 feet out of the ground on the backside. It's
Nice.
total of 9 feet, but only 5.5 is up. Well, I should do it the other way, only 3.5 can be buried. So to get to the top, the patio, we all use them to sit down on a chair and a table. It takes 5.5 feet of steps to get there. Why would we not allow somebody to sit on top of the boathouse?
I can address that, and I think some of this owes to how the draft text was copied. That is nested under the permitted encroachments into required yard setbacks, such that basically that allows for steps, let's say to a elevated screen porch, for example, that you could have the steps in the setback, because they would be considered part of that structure, not over 2.5 feet, so typically just 3 steps. That can be within the yard setback, but it does not regulate number of steps up to a boathouse. It is,
Thanks, I misunderstood that.
Okay. Right, that helps make sense. Which I think leads to that other question of the top of a boathouse being used as a patio or deck versus the idea of the top of a boathouse or outdoor accessory building being used as an enclosed additional space like gazebo, because I think there are 2 different significant pieces there. One is a patio space with a railing to address safety concerns versus one that's really intended for enclosure, which I think gets at the vision aspect. But it does add another piece. So let's say in my backyard where I don't have a boathouse, but I build a nice shed. Can I put a flat roof on it and a deck?
Sure. By our ordinance, sure.
I will say
14 feet high.
I will say most of these examples have been of those that are built into the slope, such that they will kind of take that into account. Precedent has been that the railings in those instances are obviously needed for safety, subject to the fence requirements, the 42 inches again in the shore yard. But there are examples of those that have previously been approved that are on low-lying flat ground that have then put that up 14 feet. The chair will know that some have come through ZBA for a permanent structure atop that, such as a gazebo or something that would be bolted to the ground. We do count that towards the height, so that would not be allowed. So you are limited in that respect to something that's movable, some sort of shade structure. But Technically, yes, as written now, they would be allowed to do that.
Because I'm not sure I'm opposed to being able to use the top as a patio or a deck with appropriate safety, but not sure that we're interested in allowing gazebos or three-season porches. Other than that, I think that was it. I got a deck coming on top of the garage someday.
But if you put an accessory building in your yard, whether or not it had a rooftop deck, I mean, you'd have to get approval for, I mean, you couldn't build an ADU, a dwelling unit, and we have approved a very small number of ADUs. But by code, we don't have an ADU in our code that says anybody that wants to put a dwelling unit in can put a dwelling unit. So are you, so I guess I'm unclear when you said, I don't really know why we would make somebody have a door to lake, as an example.
Mentioning that, let's say I want to have a double door that fits a riding lawnmower on the house side, not on the lake side. And I don't want it as a boathouse. I want it as a large storage shed, because I can't put a storage shed anywhere else on my lake property unless it's on the water edge.
It's hard for me to imagine that any of us would want a storage shed on the lake. I mean, I mean, as somebody who has paddled it, to go to Corey's point, I've paddled it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. I mean, the size of the boathouse, it's part of the reason why we're here. I'm not saying the square footage, like I get Chris's point around 1,000 square feet. But, I mean, they're houses. They're not little ADUs. There are some boathouses that are really like 3 stories high and very inhabitable. And there have been some that are proposed that don't have a door. So I don't know. Again, I mean, I'm a water baby, so I'm through and through. So I'm not at all suggesting that we shouldn't be doing what we can, but I'm just kind of, if we're not allowing anybody else to do an ADU, then we certainly wouldn't. I would think we'd want to keep the uninhabitable.
I don't hear him saying that it would become habitable. He's just saying a different use case for
Different use case,
storage.
right.
Yeah, just
Right.
different use case for a storage
Let me go
structure.
to Chris first, and then, yeah.
Despite the fact that I don't have a boathouse, I don't live on the lake, I live across the street from the lake. I dream of one day living on the lake and having a boathouse. So I am very interested in this. I would also like to own a boat, but I would also like to be able to put a couch in my boathouse, have a windowed, like one of those cool all-glass kind of garage doors where you can look out at it. I would want to have a little air conditioner in there, a little fridge. I might fall asleep on the couch, but I understand. I think I understand what's going on here. But what I don't understand is if this ordinance is modified, would it be illegal for me to have a couch in my boathouse? Chris mentioned he has a heater to keep his wife's bulbs warm. Will it become illegal for him to have the heater? No.
I mean,
I can address a couple of those. So the elements that would be included in the definition as proposed, heating, air conditioning facilities would not be allowed. The boathouses shall not have those elements, so they would not be allowed. The difficulty here from the zoning perspective is what can be regulated. You obviously don't need building permits for couches, just as a flippant example. That can go in without the city's view, whereas something like heating, air conditioning can make a space more comfortable and more habitable on their watch. Permits will be needed for those things. And so that's sort of and this gets to a larger discussion that's not just boathouses, but heating, air conditioning facilities in an accessory building, not in the shore yard, is pretty close to being able to, with plumbing, is pretty close to them putting a bed and being able to live in that space. So they're sort of the parameters that the city can approve before final certificate of occupancy to a level of comfort. I wouldn't say there's nothing here saying a couch can't go in, but the other elements around it that could be regulated. I think that's the desire here, to do something with those.
Chris also had, you don't just have a spigot, you have a little sink, right?
Yeah, I would strongly oppose what Doug's talking about. His right to tell me I can't heat it is, I would strongly oppose that. And for me not to be able to have a sink to wash my hands and whatever I want, you know, as far as plumbing, I'd be strongly against that. Perhaps I wasn't quite clear enough, Doug. I don't agree with that whatsoever. I thought I mentioned that. I think it's everybody's right. You can do it when you build, or Brian has his garage in his backyard, he can put heat in there, he can put plumbing in there. There's nothing against that. And it has the same code that it can't be habitable. And if we put down a definition of a boathouse that its primary purpose is for boats and watercraft and their accessories, if you build a party house and it's just full of everything else, then it wouldn't really be a boathouse, would it?
So but I guess mostly I'm confused about what we're trying to do here tonight. Doug, are you hoping that someone makes a motion to approve all these changes that have been outlined in this memo?
No, I would say there's a lot of feedback here to incorporate. I wanted to start the discussion. There have been certain applications and things that have come through that the question has been, well, how is that allowed, or what could be, what modifications could be made. So I think, tonight was to kick off that discussion. I certainly plan to review the tape, take a look at this again, and possibly, have one-on-one conversations before this is brought back again. But just know that this starts with boathouse, but there's the potential. We're seeing the same again, as I mentioned, with accessory structures. Post-COVID, a lot of people are wanting to build those office spaces. Very quickly could become accessory dwelling units and kind of take that down the road. So this is not intended as just boathouses. Any of these types of changes, habitable language, things like that, could certainly be incorporated, because we're running into the same problems inland as well.
I think that there's an opportunity if you're talking about supporting Chris's concerns of even just the percentage of the space. So if you're controlling what the size of it is, you're controlling what the height of it is, I'd actually argue that the doors are kind of an essential element. If you're thinking about like a next homeowner to one of the properties, if I was looking at a property and it was like, oh, it didn't have doors, it would become a less attractive property that could affect the home values. But if you're really controlling the volume and the sight line of the space, I'd say what's happening within that volume, so long as it meets the spirit of boathouse from the doors perspective, seems like the rest of it might kind of be details. But if you really needed to, for any other kind of essential purpose, really push for what meets the intent of a boathouse in terms of its useful space inside, maybe there's a ratio of 40% of the square footage minimum, or something along those lines that kind of helps control that. And I would also support Chris's perspective of you want to be able to sit down in that boathouse. It's part of the benefit of then living on the lake there.
You could argue it's the best seat in the property. I mean, it's the closest to the water.
Well, on top of it's probably the best.
Let's do that.
Depends on the weather.
I was actually going to say something along the line of what Brandon just said. I think the size of it, when you limit it to 1,000 square feet and you limit the height, that limits what can happen in there. It's interesting, though, because in that university program, what was that called? University.
Yeah.
They talked about one of the things they were pushing was accessory houses. And I know, well, I found it interesting. I wasn't sure we're ready for that in Monona, but that's like a whole other, to me, that's a whole other leap, and I don't know that I'm ready to do that. I think if you just say, not intended for human habitation for the boathouse, and I agree that you should be able to have heating. I mean, most people aren't going to have it, but you should be able to have it if you want to do that. And having a utility sink makes sense to me. Again, as Chris said, if you have a 1,000 square foot boathouse, you aren't going to fit, and you get one boat in there. You don't have room for like a whole kitchen with a stove, and I mean, you really can't do that. And there are some. I think there is to me, the height issue is more about the sight lines. I mean, I'm just up the street from Chris, and ours is up quite a bit higher. We don't have a boathouse. We don't even have a boat at this point. We got rid of it, which was so got rid of our service station. Kind of happy day. Better to have a friend that has a boat. That's how we look at it. But even with us, I just wouldn't. I don't like when the idea of people building porches on top of them. And we have a couple like that. That must have been grandfathered in or built on how they did it a long time ago. But interfering with the sight line of your neighbors, you just can't do that. And so I think that's more of the determinant for height. I think this needs some serious rethinking. I think those were a lot of good comments that were made, and I just go back to the drawing board. But it helps to be clear, and especially if it's coming up with accessory buildings, that is a whole other issue, and I think that should be dealt with if people are starting to ask about that, because I don't know where we are with that.
So it sounds like we're all comfortable with.
Rob.
Sorry.
That's all right, I'm forgettable.
Sorry, Rob.
I do have a boathouse. It's just connected to my house, and it's not on the water. There's been a lot said and a lot to think about. Generally speaking, I think height restrictions are important. Just like a sign code, I think that if we put a reasonable limitation to height, anybody has the right to come and ask for a variance. So whether that's 10 feet, whatever, I think it's important to have there as kind of a baseline. After listening to everybody comment and Chris's in-depth kind of rundown of his thoughts, which I appreciate, it begs the question, like, why are other lake communities, we're not unique in that regard, why do they have ordinances surrounding these boathouses? And maybe this is creating homework for at least more than she'd like, but is there something we're missing here? I think there's a lot of good points about having equity amongst residents, whether on the lake or off the lake, and their accessory buildings and what that can be. So to limit to 450, it just makes me wonder why. Why are other communities doing it? Is there a good reason that maybe they could share their experiences with? I'm not going to go long because my voice is going to give out. I'll leave it at that for now.
Just, I guess, one question to think about as well as you're looking back at this and doing more research is just what are the problems that we're having? Like, what are the challenges? And then think about how to work backwards from there, I guess. Like, what would have helped in those circumstances?
I think it's safe to say we did. They did, but nonetheless. We'll look at it again. Yeah.
I have just a couple more quick things, I promise. I couldn't find it skimming through, but I thought at one point there was a reference to the meander line in here, and that's whatever it is, we shouldn't reference the meander line for anything on the lake shore. You understand the meander line, that's back when they originally surveyed this area, where they did a clear line through the trees to make it, and then each spot, they said what the offset for the lake is, so it's not consistent anywhere. It goes back and forth, and it's nothing to talk about for a setback for anything. That would make no sense. And we should talk about railings, because there should be something about the opacity, and there has to be a railing up there that's really safe, but you can see through. You don't want somebody to put up a solid railing or something on top of a boathouse. On mine, I have cables going through steel members. My neighbors, they have glass because they like that look. But it should be something along those lines. We should talk about that impacts people's view. Heating and plumbing, I'm just going to reemphasize, I don't see why you can take away that right for somebody to be able to heat or plumb a building. All you're doing, no offense, but you're trying to make your life simple by taking away my right. I understand what you're trying to get at. You're trying to make it non-habitable, but don't take away some of the most basic rights to make your job easy. And then other communities, I can't speak for them, but I know, one, Madison just doesn't like boathouses. I don't know why. I would much rather see a boat in a boathouse, and if it's going to leak or if I spill gas while I'm filling it up, I'd rather see it happen on the floor of that boathouse than hanging over the lake and going right into the water. I think it's a safer place to have that vehicle stored. Why they didn't do it, I don't know. The county, again, that's because it's a very rural code. In the rural, they're trying to create a different thing. Again, like I said, we are very urbanized. I think the most urbanized on the chain of lakes for the Ihara.
Well, it does add to the development along the lakefront. I mean, having, especially if you go to a larger structure, which is a more sensitive area.
Correct, but our lakes are fully developed around here. Wherever the boathouses are going in now, it's usually they have retaining walls or landscaping pruned and trees up so that they don't lose their view. So I don't see where that really applies on Lake Monona. Like I said, I'd much rather see all these boats, if everybody could get it off the lake and out from on top of the water, that'd be fine by me.
Okay. So, any other feedback on this particular issue? It sounds like we're in agreement around the not inhabitable.
Absolutely.
And we're in agreement around the primary purpose, so not only purpose, but the primary purpose is for watercraft, accessories, blah, 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 right? And the minimum 1 foot above the high water mark? Does that work for us?
So I can have a little party on top of my boathouse, but not in the boathouse. Is that what that means?
No. And I like your thought, because we are restricting it, but it means that the primary use, because otherwise you'd have people just building structures because they want to have some other use there. And the only reason we've ever allowed anything in the backyard of the lake lots was for boats, because we felt it was appropriate and safer to have them off the water and have them stored there. So as much it would be nice for everybody to just be able to build a building right on the lake shore. That really was never the intent.
If this is passed as written, then we say it's...
Well, it's not being passed as written because we just took a whole bunch of stuff out of it.
But you just said we all agree that it's not intended for human habitation.
Right.
But that doesn't mean you can't recreate down there. It just means you're not using it for a home. You're not eating, sleeping, and everything in there.
Renting it out to somebody.
It's not a secondary home for someone.
Right. It's not an EDU, essentially, which would be the accessory dwelling unit, which is private. Yeah.
Now, just in my experience building things, usually if anytime you're trying to regulate that, it's more so that you are not having to do certain like life safety egress things. So in terms of a way a facility is designed, if somebody has a space, they're hardy stock, if a space isn't heated and I want to sleep in that, I'll sleep in there. I think that managing behavior is not going to be something that can get regulated, no matter whether you approve heat or sanitary or whatever. So even if we're writing into things about it being an occupied structure and unoccupied structure for human habitation or not, is more so going to, I think, regulate life safety systems that are required for the structure more than anything else. I don't know how you actually effectively regulate behaviors that might occur. And if we're already allowing electrification, to it, there's a lot of things you can do with electrification.
And I think just from a staff perspective, I think that's where the difficulty here comes, is that you're looking at a boathouse, typically the plans come in and it's just a box. And then how is that going to be programmed? How is that going to be used? And the things that were mentioned in here, the plumbing, the electricity, the gas or HVAC, they're the things that can be regulated, or otherwise it just becomes a code enforcement challenge. Because you can say not to be habited, non-inhabitable space, but then it's going to be calls on weekends, or just sort of, well, so had a party down there, or it's the thinking, and there's plenty of changes to be made, and I take that, but I think the thinking here was sort of the different levers that can be pulled, and absolutely there can be changes made, and whatever the appetite of the commission and council is, but I think that just to clarify, it wasn't property rights or anything in that respect. It really was thinking when we see something, and then what the future intent may be. It's really how do you prevent it from becoming that in the future. That was the intention. There's nothing more.
I understand, but we have the same issue on the garages that are structure in somebody's backyard they use for a garage. You could say the same thing for that. I would never single out a boathouse.
I can remember approval of a garage with a hobby space in the top part of it for gatherings.
Yes. With plumbing, heating, everything.
And we didn't find an issue with that.
Can you define or regulate the percent utilization inside of a space? Do we have any regulatory ways? So that you don't have negative statements of this isn't allowed, this isn't allowed, this isn't allowed, but sort of a positively regulated statement saying 60% of the usable space within said boathouse must be for or is allowed uses for this limited set of purposes. It's not 100% of the space, even if it was like an 80-20, then that would, you're not going to have to define behaviors, but if you're controlling the volume, controlling the height, et cetera, it kind of, as Susan was pointing out, it's sort of reductive. And again, we had plenty of other ordinances about noise ordinances, et cetera. If there was really a behavioral issue, we have ordinances for that.
Yeah.
I don't have my code with me today, but so if the biggest concern is that they don't become accessory dwelling units, then can we just say they should not become accessory dwelling units?
It's probably the formality of those again, and sort of the enforcement and the difficulty of how what can be regulated and what can't be regulated. I think there are multiple, and I've shared some of these with the chair, multiple things that are priorities of potential, things to revisit and look at, none more so than accessory dwelling units, Airbnbs, things like that. And
Okay.
I think examples have been shared with me of boathouses that you could absolutely live in and things like that. And so I think there's a few different ways to think about that and for it to be addressed. And, one way could be for it not to be habitable, but then I've seen this already multiple times in the past few months, you then get into its semantics. Well, can I have water but not this, or can I edit? It sort of becomes more straining.
Yeah.
And so that's the difficulty, and if that's the direction, then absolutely that's fine. But it was at least to just bring it forward for that discussion.
I would say, from my standpoint, Corey, somebody's had been sharing the sustainability committee for the last 4 or 5 years. I'm not against ADUs. I think there is situations. I'm not saying we should build ADUs into our code necessarily, but there are situations where I think, where somebody's taking care of a parent or parents taking care of, a family member or child that needs special support for one reason or another. I mean, and we have approved ADUs in Monona, although very few. So I don't know that I would want to put this in this particular, because then what we're saying is that you can't have an ADU when you're on the lake, but you can have them potentially somewhere else.
Yeah, that's true.
And again, you know, I don't know that we want to go there. But I think we've probably,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's mostly height, you know, the neighbor's view. I mean, that's, the lake, it varies a lot as you know, in terms of height, and just, you don't want something that's going to obstruct your neighbor's view. And as far as parties, people can have loud parties in their backyard. I mean, that's not, you know, if they want to have a party on the top of their boathouse, fine. But you don't want a structure built that's just going to compromise the enjoyment of the lake for other people. That's part of it.
yeah, Chris.
I think right now, all our ordinance says is you can have a boathouse. It doesn't define, it doesn't talk about any of this. And once we define it and say it's not a habitable space, that gives you legs to stand on. You don't even have that right now. Because there's nothing that says it can't be habitable.
Exactly.
And, you know, somebody has too many parties on the lake, they pass out drunk in there, that's probably not habitable, but I think we can kind of get a feeling for it and have a leg to stand on. We don't say any of that right now. So I think you can make that statement and without putting restrictions on what can and can't be in the boathouse. Because you can tell someone, yeah, you can't live in it, you know, they'll say, where? Why did you say that? Show me that.
Right.
I just say that, again, if I think about these structures, I'm thinking about like the long-term utility, long-term value of the property, that if someone is going to make the improvement, I'd rather that improvement could be a durable improvement. So if it meets the primary spirit and intent of what might durably last as a boathouse, whatever somebody wants to do while they own that house, I don't really care what they want to do in terms of, so long as they're not violating other ordinances. But if the durable structure continues to hold on to the spirit of being, you know, the intent of what it is, then I think that we're promoting, you know, the value of the property long term. I think positive statements, things that ensure that it can be at least meet the minimum utility of a boat structure, which I think you've outlined a lot of things for. I would support anything that would be positive statements that ensure that it can be used for that purpose.
Right.
Rather than negative statements saying, hey, you're not allowed to do these things with this structure.
Right. Okay. Are we good? Ready to move on? You got quite a few notes there, Doug. Again, Elisa, too, thank you. Doug. With that, I'm going to find my agenda. I assume that we're not ready for any kind of consideration of action tonight, or the action would be does somebody want to make a motion around action, which is to say to table it, or to request staff?
Do we need to take any formal action, or can we just?
Can we review a revised draft?
Technically, we can just let it fall off the agenda.
Okay.
Notice it's probably better because if you remember last week, we tabled Patrick's and then we forgot to make a motion to take it off the table tonight, which technically is not correct.
Okay.
So I think in light of that, we should probably just let it fall off the table and it can be brought for action when you're ready with another agenda.
I could have sworn when I tried to let something fall off the table just like this before, I was advised otherwise, but that's fine. I'm happy to have it fall off the table. Let's move on to number 7, reports of staff and commission members. 7A, status of development proposals.
Yeah, so I've got an economic development update just to share with everybody. This is that the CDA just recently made an adjustment to their Renew Monona loan program, which now allows for first-generation homebuyer loans as well. This was an amendment that was proposed by Alder Core before her term ended, and it would be that up to $40,000 of down payment assistance with a $10,000 match. If you're not familiar with the Renew Monona loan program, this is funded by an expiring TID district that is used for the TIF, the tax increment financing. It's a 2% loan over 10 years and effectively is used for more affordable and more achievable housing in the city. And so this program is for those whose parents or guardians have owned and are looking to purchase at or below 120% of the median assessed value. So The assistance to the match is a higher ratio. There's more down payment assistance that's offered than a first-time home buyer. There is that also, but the terms are less favorable. So just wanted to share that. Covers a couple different elements here in the topic, but that was approved by the CDA at their most recent meeting. And certainly with the way interest rates and mortgages are going, we expect to see a little bit more interest in that program with those types of terms again. The upcoming Plan Commission items, the Monona Oaks Community Church, the school program there is looking to increase that occupancy. There was a zoning permit approved for that with the condition that it was not to exceed a certain value. They're looking to expand that number, so coming back effectively for revision to that zoning permit. The Chipotle over at the corner of Broadway and Monona Drive, they're also looking to come back with their zoning permit. There are a couple conditions there for further review, Plan Commission review. So they're looking to come back with those details to get some of those things worked out. I think most pressing there was the site circulation as it related to the drive-through and the second use. And finally, there'll be a rezoning pre-hearing for the Schwen's service. It is currently zoned single-family. It appears to be a drafting error. Effectively, they're looking to rezone that from single-family to retail business, which is in line with the adjacent properties. So,
Single family.
It is.
It had to be a drafting error.
Yeah.
Definitely a drafting error.
So that'll be coming through on that track, and I'm looking to assist them as much as I can. No fee or anything like that, and we'll look to take them through that process for that.
If it's a drafting error, can't we go back and dig through minutes or whatever, or to find that wherever the mistake was obviously made without having to?
Not as the zoning map is currently adopted. We did look through previous maps, and it was also the case in the, I think the 2004 zoning map that we have. It was also single family. So it's been there for a little while. Previous zoning permits, I believe from the 80s, do reference it as more of a commercial retail space. Whether it was defined literally as RB is less clear, but it is clearly laid out as single family at the moment. So we'll be looking to adjust that. The land use maps do address what it currently is, but the zoning does not.
Okay.
That's it for those items.
Do you have any updates on the Monona Garden parcel? Or?
So they have submitted their TIF numbers.
Okay.
So just as a reminder, that did pass Public Works, and so I would say that it's, with regards to the street parking, at this point the preference is to have them through CDA. They've been through a couple times to potentially get a term sheet finalized prior to any potential formal consideration here at the Plan Commission.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Anything else on? You just talked about the effort at CDA for the loans, which is a DEI item among other things. Anything else as it relates to sustainability or DEI?
I don't know if you wanted to mention the Madison Metro.
Yeah, you may have heard since that we have been in discussion with the Madison Metro as of late regarding bus service here in Monona. More specifically, I would say very frequently, certainly since I've been on the council and well before I was on the council, Monona has approached Madison Metro about if adding stops here, if not more, in Monona. And heretofore, they weren't that interested, but they have a new director and who's really looking at it much more as a regional transportation resource that has been working with the transit committee and with the city staff and proposed multiple routes, and so there's very specific routes are being worked out, and we're still struggling with not struggling with, but certainly just in discussion around the impact on our seniors, because they would essentially, Monona Transit would effectively go away, and we would become part of Madison Metro. As I said, it would be a regional thing. But it's all in discussion. We'll have open, open houses and hearings with the public around it, and it's still being discussed with staff. It's still being discussed at the Transit Commission. So, it's I think it's a positive development in many respects. I think regional transit is something where they, whether or not it fits Monona and what we need is still, I think, a question mark. But certainly interesting time in that regard, and would certainly have an impact. Mass transit always has an impact, both on issues including diversity, equity, inclusion, but it also has an impact on generally our sustainability efforts. Anytime you can do mass transit, it would be as currently discussed, it would be 7 days a week. 7 days a week from morning until quite late in the evening. So it would be much stronger coverage than we're able to do with. Obviously, that's one of the other attractive parts of it.
Would I be able to take a bus to State Street from Monona?
You would.
That's fantastic. I spent a small fortune on Ubers to downtown.
Yeah. And my understanding is one of the big blocks was always the expense of a contract with them was put it out of line. Is that no longer the case, or are they?
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what it is. That's what's
huge
put it out
cost.
before is
Right.
every time they've come back, it has been beyond what we can afford to do in terms of transit. Safe to say that our transit, like every other service and company, is having a really hard time finding drivers. So we've had to cut back our transit simply because we can't even cover the routes that we've offered before. And they came back this time and saying that effectively it would be an even swap. What we currently invest in transit, instead we would give to them, and we would get a pretty substantial level of service. Lots of details still to work out, but I really appreciate the discussions. I think it's a healthy discussions. So with that, does anybody else have any questions, requests for information for city staff? Yes.
I guess just the development on the Whitehorse property, is that still coming along, or where's?
Still waiting to hear on the WIDA funding.
Okay.
So I had heard, I believe somebody else had reached out to Sean O'Brien, one of the folks leading that. They were still waiting to hear on the WIDA.
Yeah, that wasn't until later this,
It was supposed to be April.
Oh,
I think
okay.
things have just delayed slightly, but
Okay.
I'll be reaching out this week just for an update as well.
We just made a big office move, and it's kind of thrown things up in the air a little bit. Yeah.
Two things. First, just a question on the CPA program. They still also have it where we give the low-interest loans for people to upgrade their homes, right? That was the original intent, so people be able to do it?
Yes.
Okay.
It's an addition.
Thanks. And then my other comment is much more complicated, sorry. I'm wondering, do we have the data yet from the latest census so we know what we have for the breakdown of rental versus ownership housing in Monona? Because it seems to me we have, over the last years, approved a lot of apartments. And it would be nice to have housing types that are entry level other than apartments. I'd like to see if we could somehow get maybe some condos going. Everybody says they can't do what they do. Or some smaller, easier to afford homes where people can have a start to build equity instead of always paying rent. And I'm so worried because we have so little space to do any changes on that they're filling up like crazy with apartments. And I'd like to see us diversify that a little bit. So it would just be a future discussion thing if people agree or disagree, but I'd sure love to see housing options that you can own and start to build equity that are affordable.
Yeah. I know, actually, I think the last time Populance was in front of us for that development, he was talking about doing a mix of ownership.
He said maybe.
He said maybe.
He said the financing
Yeah,
was
he
hard,
said maybe.
I think.
He had that carrot out there. I might.
I might.
Right.
Come with me, I might.
Right. Okay. Anything else? Any other requests? Do I have a motion?
I will move approval.
Adjournment.
Oh, yes, adjournment. It's late.
You move approval for adjournment.
I do, yes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you.
No, those are good comments.
Missed the big scan, but it sounds like it was bad, so.